This conference will now be recorded.
The Docker basics. All right. So we have set up a software. We installed and set up a software web application inside our AWS machine, right? What all things did we do? We did many things. We had created a machine in the AWS account. Then we downloaded the web application, the Wordpress web application from the internet, and then we what else did we do? We have sorry. Yeah, we downloaded the web application from the internet and we extracted them. And then we had to create a database after installing MySQL. We had to create a database. And you want your vectors to connect to the database. What you did is you modified the wp-config.php file to provide the credentials to connect to the database. And then you kept your Wordpress and MySQL inside the AWS machine, and then you wanted to serve the Wordpress page to the people. For that, you need a web server. You installed Apache, and then you wanted PHP module to be installed. You installed that, and you want the MySQL module for PHP to be installed, and then you did that, and finally you find your WordPress is working fine. You are able to browse for WordPress and all is well. And we did all these kind of installations and configurations within the AWS machine, right? We copied the files inside the AWS machine file system in the var www.html folder. We have installed Apache inside the AWS machine, the Linux machine. We installed PHP and the MySQL modules within the same AWS machine, right? These are the things what we did. All right. And so every time you install some software, you are basically changing your machine, right? You are changing your machine a lot. You are installing lot of libraries, lots of dependencies, lots of modules, downloading some applications and everything. So this is the traditional way of working. I mean, this is the way how you generally install a software and set up a web application or whatever, I mean, whatever software that you want to install. So today, actually, that is not needed, even though many people still do the same procedure what we did yesterday. Today I'm going to talk a new approach in order to install and configure software inside the machines. So we will be taking Linux as the reference. In a Linux machine, in our AWS machine, we can install the software without affecting the machine much. We can run the software independent of the machine. And whenever we want to remove the software from the machine, we can remove everything at one shot. So keeping the machine clean, running your software isolated within the machine, and that is what we are going to talk about, how we can achieve that. And that is what Docker is all about, or containerization is all about. So we are going to talk about some basics of containerization. So think about this scenario. You have a machine, right? You have a server, and I have told you, as a company you will have different software component, and different software components you want to run inside this machine, right? You will have your WordPress front end, then you will have your MySQL server, MySQL database, and then you want the communication from WordPress to MySQL. There are different things that you need to set up. So rather than directly setting up everything inside the machine, what you can do is you can actually create some small lightweight boxes, right? Some small lightweight boxes. This is how they will look like. And inside that box, you can set up whatever you need. For example, so assume I want to create the MySQL. For that, I would set up in one box. Then I want to set up WordPress. WordPress, I will set up in a different box. And I would put both of the boxes in the same machine. I mean, assume that kind of flexibility you will get. Create the boxes whenever you want, then software will start running. Delete the boxes whenever you don't want. Now the software is completely erased and your machine become clean. So whatever software you need and all the components of it. So think about MySQL, right? You want to create a MySQL database for WordPress to connect to. What are the things that you should take care? You should install MySQL. MySQL must be installed inside that, and you need to create one database. Then you need to create a user and password, right? And then yes, you must make sure that MySQL service is running. You should start the MySQL service. So these many things should be done in order to set up a MySQL properly, a database correctly. So rather than directly installing MySQL in my AWS machine, or I mean, I'm taking AWS as a reference. I mean, this could be your laptop also. Rather than installing everything on your laptop, installing MySQL, starting MySQL, creating database, creating user and password inside your laptop, you can rather create a container inside your laptop, and this container contains everything that you need. And when you don't need MySQL, just delete this container, and now your machine is clean. And when you want this container, when you want to run MySQL again, just put this container back inside your machine. So assume you get this kind of flexibility. You would love that, right? And in order to set up WordPress, what all things you did, you downloaded the WordPress, right? You wanted to download the WordPress files, you wanted to install Apache, you wanted PHP to be installed, the Apache module, then you want the MySQL module to be installed on top of PHP, then you copied the WordPress files into the var www.html, then you modified the wp-config.php file. What else? Or what not? There are many configurations that you did in order to set up WordPress correctly. So think about this, all this thing what you did, the Apache installation, downloading WordPress, the PHP MySQL installation, module installations, wp-config.php file configuration. Assume everything can be done inside a box, and you can create the box when you want to run WordPress and remove the box when you don't need them, right? It sounds too good to be true, and yes, it is possible. You can set up things in this way. Anyone in the world who want to run the WordPress, right, on their machine. This can be AWS machine, and we are taking AWS as the reference, or it can be your laptop, or it can be a server that you, physical server that you got from a data center, or it can be any machine in the world. The machine has a operating system. Assume in our machine we have the Linux operating system installed. Right, in our case it's Ubuntu, which is nothing but Linux. And then what I choose to do is, rather than installing Apache in here and downloading WordPress files, those are the terrific steps, right? Lots of complex steps. What we did yesterday during our class, we directly installed everything, configured everything within the machine. Instead of doing that, I take a box of WordPress, put it here, and I take a box of MySQL, put it here, and wp-config.php file is modified in such a way that it connects to the database correctly, and now people can connect to this box on port 80 from their browser, right? Somebody from their browser can connect to the WordPress on port 80, and then now you can see the WordPress page on your browser. So think about this situation is possible, and you decided that this server does not need to run WordPress anymore. You just take this box out of the server. I mean, completely erase the WordPress installation. It is as simple as that. Or probably rather than running one WordPress instance, you probably want to run two WordPress instances together. Yes, you have that flexibility also. Create two boxes and one box for MySQL. Then both boxes of WordPress can, WP config is modified in such a way that this box can connect to this MySQL. This box also can connect to this MySQL. So you can do that. Sometimes you want to run multiple instances of WordPress, right? You are getting huge traffic. One is not sufficient. You might want more. Yes, you can run two boxes together. Basically, two WordPress setup together. So think about, you get such kind of flexibilities. It sounds really great, right? So this is possible today with containerization, and these are called containers that you can directly run inside the machine. The containers can be configured according to your requirement. Inside the container, you can configure whatever you want. You want to install Apache, download WordPress, install PHP, install MySQL module, modify the wp config.php file. Anything that you want to do, you can do. Just like how you work on a normal machine, you can work inside this container. Yet, this is not a real machine. Don't assume the container is a real machine. The container have an operating system. No, container don't have an operating system. It simply uses the operating system of your host machine. That means in our case, it would be AWS machine. So, or if it is your laptop where you are setting up these things, it would be your laptop. So your laptop has an operating system, or our AWS machine has an operating system. This container run inside the AWS machine and uses the operating system of the AWS machine. All the binaries and libraries, most of them are shared. It is a central kernel that would manage each and every container within the machine. Whatever container that you run within your AWS machine, it is the same AWS machine's kernel that manages all the containers. And you also get this flexibility. You create a new AWS machine later. You can just easily copy these containers into this machine. So you can have this complete flexibility. Or you want to create a duplicate boxes in the new AWS machine, you can do that. So it makes things easy for you. The Docker or the containerization would make the machine management pretty easy. Got it? And the best part is you can store this container as a backup file, which we call the image, right? You can create an image. You can basically create an image. So basically, image is nothing but a backup of this container. And similarly, for MySQL, you can create an image. And they are very lightweight. As I told you, container don't run their own operating system, so they are very lightweight. They contain some libraries and binaries for the container to run properly. That can be there, but not the entire operating system. The container don't have the entire operating system, but certain libraries and binaries that will make it look like a real operating system, right? Other than that, nothing. And then if it is a WordPress container, it would contain WordPress, it would contain Apache, PHP, or MySQL module, and the WP configurations, WordPress configurations. So these many things you would be able to find inside a Docker image. And once you have this Docker image, from this image, you can now create more containers. Right? Now, from that image, you will be able to create more containers. So this is all possible. So these are called Docker images, or right, images, and these are called containers. Image is more like a backup file from which a container is created. And after making some change in the container, you can commit a new image. That means by default automatically they are not committed. You make any change in the container, they are not committed, but you can commit them. If you commit them as an image, or probably you can create a new image. That's what generally you would do. This new image that you create would have everything the container has. So right, you can build new images. That is the point what I am trying to make here. And then once you have the image, then creation of the container is a matter of 2 seconds, right? From that image, just create a container, and that's it. So what
Basil,
yeah
sorry, Basil. So let's suppose if I am doing any changes in this Apache or PHP or anything, correct? Between,
mhm.
so it will automatically make changes in that image part as well, or how it will be?
No, no, that's what I'm saying. No, if you make any change in the container does not update the image. But you can do that. You can manually do that, commit your changes to the image. So generally what you do is you will create a new image from the container. That is what you would generally do.
Okay.
All right, so think about a company who achieved all these kind of flexibilities. I mean, what they decided to do is whatever software that they have, they started to put all this software inside such kind of small images. You know how to create image. First you will create a container and you make the changes in the container, and then you can commit the changes to an image. So the company can develop their images. It's up to them to develop their images. So think about a company who developed a lots of images. Think about the Flipkart company. They have the front end. One second. So they have different software. They have the front end, they have the backend software, they have the software to manage the Paytm payments, and they have the softwares to manage the Google Pay payment. And like that, they have different softwares. They have another software to manage the shopping cart, and they have another software. They have another software for managing the Prime customers, and then to manage the order history, order management. There's another software. So like that, a company like Flipkart who developed different softwares and different software components. So assume what they did is some login functions. So assume what they did is They have converted their software into Docker images. Maybe Google Pay related, Flipkart company need some software that can allow your customers to make payment using Google Pay or Amazon, or think about any company who want to do this. They will develop a software. I mean, it may be written in different programming languages. It could be in Java or it could be in Python. Pro. It can be any programming language that they develop the software in. And assume this software, right? You know how difficult it is to run a software, right? What all things did you have to do in order to run Wordpress? Think about previous class, previous session where we set up Wordpress. In the prerequisite session, we set up Wordpress traditionally on the machine. What all things Wordpress depends on? Wordpress need Apache as the web server. Wordpress need PHP to be installed if it want to work properly, and MySQL module must be installed. You want to configure the wp config.php file. Then WordPress want to connect to a database, you should provide the database, and wp config.php file should contain the correct database information. So these many things you have to do on the WordPress web server for configuring it properly. And that is the case of any software. Think about Google Pay software that developed by the retailer, and what they want to do is they want to install Google Pay. I mean, they want to set up everything. So assume they developed it in Java programming language. So in order to run Google Pay software, they need Java installed, and they will have different dependency that this software will have. So all the dependency need to be installed. So maybe to configure a software, there are a lot of steps that a company have to do always when they want to run a software. So what the retailer will do is they will put the application, the software, along with all the requirement inside the image, right? For example, all the complete code developed by the developers and the dependencies and the configurations, like wp config.php file. Remember, we provided the configuration. So every software will have such kind of configuration. It want to connect to the database, or it might want to do different things. So configurations you want to manage, and then then you need an environment where this software can run. For example, if the software is written in Java programming language, first you should install Java, then only it will run, right? So there are a list of things that should be made ready before you can run a software. And what if you put all these things inside one single image? So if I talk about the Google Pay, the Java code, whatever wrote by your developers to develop the code, and the code dependencies in Java, they are called libraries or whatever, and then configurations, whatever configuration that you have, then environment, that means Java installation, and everything you did inside this image, right? Everything you have inside this image. In that case, then running Google Pay software means running a container. It is as simple as that. Whenever you want to run the Google Pay software, all you do is you just run a container, and it will now start running your Google Pay software in it. And yes, you need a machine to do that. You need AWS machine or whatever machine. It has to be done inside a machine. This container should go inside the machine. The point which I am trying to make here is that you have learned this, right? If you, I mean, think about this. If you have Wordpress as a single image, which contained everything. It contained Apache, it contained PHP, it contained the MySQL module for PHP, right? And it contained everything that you ever need and some way to configure it as well. WP config to modify WP config. There is some nice way to do that. So if you had such an image with you, then all you had to do was create a container inside the machine, and that would have done your job. Right? All you have to do is just create a container inside your AWS machine from that image, and this will listen on port 80, and anyone who connect on this container from their laptop, they would be able to see the WordPress page in their browser. It would become this much flexible, right? A world with containers are very, very easy, very, very less complications. Understand what I'm saying? Is it making sense? So, intention of every company should be to create such kind of Docker image. I mean, keep creating Docker images for whatever software that they have, and make sure that they have everything that they need. Everything the software ever need is within the image itself. Then running the software is pretty easy now. Whenever you want to run it, just create a container, and that's it. Software will start running. And of course, in order to create a container, you need the container to be created inside a machine like your AWS machine or whatever. Your software will run as independent boxes inside your service. Sounds pretty good, right? So any questions on this? I know this is like a now it would be like a Alice in Wonderland. All these things are possible. That's what you need to understand. All these things are possible, and I will show you how we will do the practicals. I'm just trying to give you an overview. What are the advantages of containerization?
Basil, so yesterday we tried to install, to configure this web application, we tried to install Apache and my database, MySQL, and we did some configuration changes. And now we are saying with the containers, we no need to download or install this Apache and MySQL. We are going to get an image and we can use that image and run a software.
Correct. Basically, we are going to get rid of this habit of installing everything ourselves, but rather get an image and run the container, or develop your own image and run the container. That would be what we will do going forward.
Okay. So, how can we make a difference between a container and an image? So, container contains images. Is that right?
A container image is the backup of a container. You make some change in the container. Let's say you install some new software in the container. You can commit your changes to one image. You can create a new image from that container. What that means is the image now have everything the container had. So now it is assume image is just a file, like an exe file. So you keep those files. You know that what happens if you run them. It will run your software, right? So you can assume images are more like some exe file. So think about your laptop. I am giving a simple example. I don't think this is the right example. In your laptop. So assume inside your laptop you have an exe file, Google Chrome exe file, which when you double click, it will open Google Chrome. So this Google Chrome browser is running. It resembles a running container. That exe file resembles the image. I mean, this is just an example, but yeah, this is the logic. Image is more like a symbol file. It's not a running process. Apache can run only in the container. Apache cannot run inside the file, inside the Docker image. Apache resides in it, and Apache will run and it will listen on port 80 only when you create a container from it. I mean, that is the logic. Container has running process. Image don't have that.
Okay, got it.
Basil,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Are these containers and images readily available on the internet, or we are supposed to develop?
Many of them are, the free software are freely available.
Okay.
So about that. So these are probably the images developed by your company, the shopping cart, order management, prime customers, because these are your own software that your company developer have developed. The retail company have a number of developers who developed all these software, and yes, then it would be their responsibility to create such kind of Docker images. But for Wordpress, for MySQL, for Oracle DB, for different PostgreSQL database technologies, you don't have to develop your own Docker images. Even for WordPress is a free popular software. You don't have to develop your own Docker images. You can get a free Docker image from the internet. You can use them. That's what we will do initially in order to set up WordPress. Rather than developing our own WordPress image, we can do that also, which we will discuss at a later point of time. But rather, what we will do is we will get an official WordPress image free. It is free, and from that image we will create containers in our AWS machine, and then it would start running WordPress. You want to run MySQL, you want to create a database, you will look for an image, a free image, free official image for MySQL, and from that image you can create a container inside your AWS machine. So this is what we will do. So there are many free images, there are many paid images, there are images that you develop yourself. So in your own software, you don't have an option, but develop it yourself. In case of MySQL, don't develop yourself, get the free image from the internet and use it. In case of WordPress, it is the same thing. In case of any official software that are free, you can get the Docker image also for free from a Docker registry, right? Which I will talk more about just now. So from there, you can download these free images and use them.
So these images you're talking about, these are not like image of each container, right? So you're saying I didn't get that point.
Yeah, every container is associated with an image.
An image, right? So it's after we create a container, so the image would be the image of that container, right? So it's not so how would we get a image from the internet, and how would it work? Because our container would be different, right?
Container and image are different. It is just that containers are created from an image. That's their only relationship. So once you created the container, it is the containers that matters, right? The point what I'm trying to make here is that definitely you need an image. Only from the image a container can be created. That is the basic rule. And once you created the container, it is the container that will run your software. And containers is what that matters. In when you run a software, they run in the containers. But yes, you need the Docker images to create them. So it is your responsibility to either develop the Docker images yourself, or you get some free images from hub.docker.com according to your requirement. That you have that flexibility, but right, container is what that matters.
Oh, okay, I understand. So I initially I thought the after creating a container, it then image. So okay, I understand now.
Okay, that is also true. So when you want to develop these Docker images, what you do is you create a sample container, configure everything up, then commit an image. So that is the way how you create images also. So it is like, you know, when you want to develop Docker images, that is the procedure, which is a different approach that we will take discuss at a later point of time.
It can be both ways, you're saying.
Correct. It can be both.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it can be both ways. So just think about, I will give another example. I will give another example of, think about you are running Google Chrome on your laptop. So you double click on the Google Chrome exe file, and the Google Chrome browser will open, right? That was the example that I talked about, and you can assume the exe file as the image and the running Google Chrome process as the real container. And when it comes to software will have an executable file which would reside in the Docker image. And when that executable file get executed, it would run the software, and that running process is in the container. So that is why I took that as the example, the exe file and Google Chrome. So who create this exe file? The Google company creates them. So that is why you don't bother about them. You don't bother about creating them. You get that, download that Google Chrome exe file, and you double click, and then the Chrome browser will run on your computer. And if there is a new update that Google Chrome make, they would give you a new exe file. You double click on that new exe file, the new version of the Google Chrome browser will now run. And all these practices are same for images and containers also. So we have the exe file and we run the containers, and that is similar to executing an exe file and running a process, running a software. And how did Google company develop this exe file? We didn't bother about it. So I'm not going to get into that. I'm just saying, to develop this image, it is the reverse process that you generally follow. We will talk about that at a later point of time in detail.
Basil,
Yes.
Here one image consists with one container, right? Or else we have a lot images with the one container. Like it is possible.
One container for one image, and from same image, multiple containers can be created.
Okay, from a particular image, multiple containers can be created.
Yeah, correct. And all container will look exactly alike.
What?
All container will look same. If
Okay.
you create 10 containers from one image, you got the Wordpress image. Anyone in the
Yes.
world create a container from that image, the container will look exactly same.
Okay. So there is no use of creating another container.
Sometimes what people does is they will run 5 containers together to balance the load. If they are getting huge traffic, they will run more containers. So if you have a Docker image, you need only one Docker image from which n number of containers can be created, and they can
Okay.
work together. That's also possible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so you can take a short break now. I think, anyone else, any more questions on this?
Basil, if I want to take a backup of that container, so I need to take a backup of that image.
We will get into those topics in some time.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So you run the containers when you want to run your software. That is the only time when you would run a container, when you want to run your software, that's all. And yeah, to develop a Docker image, you use containers, intermediate containers and stuff. But yeah, we will get into that process at a later point of time. All right, so take a short break and then we will start with the practicals. And then you will see how easy it is. Not so easy for you initially. First couple of days, it takes time to understand the concepts and stuff, but yeah, we will be using containerization throughout the training. So these topics are very important. All right, so after a break, 5 minutes break, see you after the break.
This conference will now be recorded.
So please watch the video and email me if you got any doubts or questions. All right, Shrikant. Okay. So you have seen the basics of Docker. I mean, how the Docker architecture look like, what is a Docker image and what is a Docker container. And I also told you there is a Docker registry from which you can get the Docker images for free, right? It's hub.docker.com is that Docker registry. If you go to, I mean, you can browse for hub.docker.com on your browser. That will take you to a website, and which is basically a registry where you can find more than 4 million Docker images. For MySQL, there is an official Docker image. For Wordpress, there is another official Docker image. And most of the software which are available today, right? I mean, you can say most of the software available today, now they have a Docker image. So to run those software, you don't have to do lots of changes on your system. You just get that Docker image and run the containers. It is as simple as that. So if you go to hub.docker.com and click on this explore button here, then you can see all the Docker images that are available. There are over 5 million Docker images. Right? These are different Docker images available. You can just search here. If you want a MySQL Docker image, you can search for a MySQL Docker image here, or if you want a Wordpress Docker image, you can search for it here. So this is the place where you can find all Docker images. Postgres, it is a database similar to MySQL, right? And this is the image of Postgres, and anyone in the world can download this image and then they can create a container. So you can avoid the Postgres installation step, database creation step, user and password creation step, everything you can skip. All you need to do is get this image, run a container, and Postgres will start running inside the container. And similarly, Redis is a similar software. Node is another software framework. Like that, there are MySQL, you already know about MySQL. So how did you set up MySQL yourself? Forget about WordPress. How did you set up MySQL yourself? You needed a machine, an AWS machine, and inside the machine you installed it using apt-get, and then you created a database, you created a user and password, you granted the privileges, right? All these things was your responsibility. But if you are using this image to create a container, at the time of container creation itself, once the container got created, it would contain a database, it would contain a user and password, it would contain MySQL software installed and running. So no need of the complex procedure of installing MySQL and stuff. Similarly, you can find different Docker images. Look at the Wordpress Docker image. Wordpress also has a Docker image over here. So this Docker image already contains Wordpress files in the www.html folder. It contains Apache installed in it, PHP installed in it, the MySQL module installed in it, then a way to configure the wp config.php file with the correct database credentials. Everything is there inside this image. So all you have to do is just create a container from this image and Wordpress will run in that container. Pretty straightforward, right? So let us see how we can start exploring this. And my intention is I want to take some of this image and I want to run some containers. That's what I am planning to do. So in order to do that, I told you first you need a machine.
Basil, how could we get to know that a particular image contains these all softwares like Apache web server and MySQL and everything set up? How could we get to know that this image consists of these all things?
Do you really want to know?
Like
No,
we are at
I got one question, and no, I'm just asking. I'm trying to answer it with another question. So, if you have a software and you have the software running, right? So you want to install Google Chrome on your laptop, and all you do is download the exe file, double click, and run it. Do you really
yes,
want to know what that exe file consists of?
yes, not needed.
Not needed. So the point why we are using Docker here is because, right, you have a official Docker image for WordPress. You know that you run a container from it and you connect to the port 80 of that container, you will see a WordPress page. That is the guarantee.
Yes, yes. We not need to configure this all. These all contain defaultly, you mean to say.
Exactly. And
Yes,
it's a
yes,
different
got.
story when you want to develop your own Docker image. It's a different story where you
Yes,
need
yes.
to know. But yeah,
Thank you, thank you.
thank you. Yeah.
uh, what is the procedure in the real time? Like the companies does create the Dockers from the scratch, or are they going to use from the Docker Hub?
Both. So a MySQL image I would never develop in my company because I don't have to. I get it from hub.docker.com. So yeah, but the shopping cart software that I developed in my company, I won't get the image anywhere. I have to develop it myself. So both.
In real time, like the company will have a different kind of softwares and versions, all these things, right? So
Definitely.
uh, it's not mandatory that, like as you said, like a couple of things we directly download from the Docker Hub, and then a couple of things we build from our in-house. So how do we pack all these? Like we'll pack all these containers into another container, or like we'll work all these containers independently and get connected each other?
Independently. So one container would contain only one software. So you have 100 software components. You would create 100 Docker images and separate containers from each images. That's the best practice. All right. Yeah, we will be getting into these topics in detail later on. So
Do you cover creating a Docker from the scratch here?
we will, yeah. All right. So let us start. So as I told you, in order to create a Docker container runs inside a real machine, right? Such as AWS machine or your laptop. And this machine where you want to run the containers, it's called a Docker host. And that is the responsibility of a Docker host. I mean, I'm talking about this particular machine over here. So this can be your laptop or this can be your AWS machine or whatever. So the containers run inside this machine. Maybe a Wordpress container would run here. Then a MySQL container would run here. Then different containers would run inside a real machine. So this is a real machine where you run the containers, and this machine is called a Docker host. We call the machine a Docker host. So I'm going to create a Docker host first because I need a host in order to create containers. And in order to create containers, I need a Docker image. And for now, I will get the official Wordpress image from hub.docker.com. And from that image, I'm going to create the Wordpress container inside the machine which I set up in AWS. So first of all, let me create a machine in my AWS account, and inside that machine I will install Docker. That is the only thing you have to do. You must install Docker, and then that machine can now run a number of containers in it. So first of all, let me do that. Let me create this machine. I'm going to create this machine. It is called Docker host, and once this machine is created, I will run containers inside. Right, that's the plan. So let me create this Docker host. I will create an AWS machine, and you can install Docker in your laptop also. You don't need an AWS machine, but let us use AWS as the Docker host. I'm going to create a new machine in my AWS account. I request you to create a fresh machine. Do not use the same machine that you used yesterday. You can terminate that machine and you can create a new one.
Basil, even that host also resides in AWS machine only, right?
Right. Host is the AWS machine.
Okay.
Host does not reside in AWS machine. Your AWS machine is the host. So I'm going to install Docker in the AWS machine, then it becomes the host machine.
Okay.
So I'm going to create a new machine in my AWS account. That is where I want to set up Docker, everything. And the machine that you created yesterday or previous session, you just delete it, right click and terminate it. We are going to create a new machine. I'm going to create a new. Terminate means the machine will be completely wiped out. So if you want to take any backup, take backup. Stopping is different, terminating is different. So so I'm going to create a new machine, and my plan is to use the new machine as the Docker host. So it's a normal AWS machine.
Basil, why do we need to create a new machine? Why can't we use the same machine?
It's fine. If you want to use the same machine, it's fine. I choose to create a fresh machine. That's it.
Okay, thanks.
So now what I did is I created a machine in my AWS account, and this is the machine I am planning to create as a Docker host. All right, so let me log into my AWS machine. My AWS machine is not eligible to become a Docker host yet. First, you should install Docker in it, right? When you install Docker inside any machine in the world, that machine would become a Docker host. After that, the machine can host containers in it. So let us do that. So right now I am on my AWS machine and I am going to install Docker. In order to install Docker, you can actually use apt-get update and apt-get install, but better than blindly running apt-get update and apt-get install for Docker, I would always go to the Docker official documentation and follow the procedure, whatever is given over there. That is what throughout the training, we will follow that approach. We won't blindly run apt-get install. We will go to the official documentation and follow the steps. So let's go there. Go to the Docker website, search in Google how to install Docker and how to install Docker in Ubuntu. Go to the official documentation for Docker installation for Ubuntu, and then I will run the commands one by one. So it starts with a apt-get update. Sorry. First, I run the apt-get update command. And then the next step is, you are installing some basic software using apt-get install. This is not Docker that I am installing. Some, from prerequisites I am installing. And after that, I want to run this command. This is some digital signature, which would verify that you install the correct package. That's what signatures will do. It will verify that later when you install software using apt-get, it will verify this. I am adding the repository. This is the repository that contains Docker. So I am adding the repository first into the sources.list file, and then I will install Docker. I should run apt-get update command first and then apt-get install command to install Docker. And now I run apt-get install command. There are three packages: Docker CE command line, and then containerd.io. Three packages I am installing, and that's it. That's it. It is now, Docker is now getting installed. So once you install Docker in any
Basil,
machine,
can you just repeat the steps once again? It was just too fast.
yeah, I just copy pasted. Actually, all the steps I just copy pasted. That would do the job. So generally, I will. What I did is, I ran. I first installed some prerequisites using apt-get update and apt-get install. Then I added some digital signature. Basically, what digital signatures does is it will verify the installation. So if you added a signature first, later it will verify the installation when you install them. That is the simple purpose of digital signature. And I am adding the repository into the sources.list. This is the repository that contains Docker. So inside that, Docker packages are available. Then you run apt-get update and apt-get install to install them. Okay. So what I did is I just copy pasted all the commands one by one, starting from here. Okay. All right. So the next thing what I'm going to do is, now Docker is installed. So any machine that has Docker installed in it is a Docker host. All right. Any machine that has Docker installed in it is a Docker host. So now this machine can run containers. And there's a command, docker ps is the command. If you run this command, it will list all the running containers. Currently, there are no containers inside your AWS machine. We haven't created any. And that is exactly what I am going to do. I'm going to create a Wordpress container inside this Docker host. Can I do it? Can I create a doc? Yes, you can. So WordPress already has an official image available in hub.docker.com. I can take that image, then from that image I can create a container, and that is exactly what I am going to do. So let me draw this. Let me clear this picture. So now you have your Docker host. This is your AWS machine. And now I want to run a container inside this machine, the WordPress container. And the WordPress containers need to be created from the WordPress image. So this WordPress image I can get from hub.docker.com, the official Docker hub. And from that I can create a container. And this container will run inside my AWS machine. AWS machine, or you can call this machine the Docker host. And one Docker host, as I told you, can run multiple containers and it can contain multiple images. So first of all, let me download this image, the WordPress image, to my AWS machine. So there's a command that you can run on a Docker host that will pull this image from hub.docker.com to your AWS machine. So let me do that first. So I am inside the AWS command. The command that I need to run is docker pull WordPress. Docker space pull space WordPress, and WordPress here, whatever I put is nothing but the name of the image that I want to download. And if you are unsure about the name of the image, you can go to hub.docker.com and search for WordPress, and then you will find an official WordPress image. So over here in the search box, you can search for WordPress. You can see the list of WordPress images, and over here you can find official image. This is an official image. So the name of the image you can find here, it is WordPress. So anyone in the world who execute this command, docker pull WordPress, what happens is this image get downloaded from hub.docker.com. So I'm running this command on my AWS machine. So the WordPress image get downloaded to my AWS machine. That's what I am doing. So what I am doing here is this image is being downloaded inside my AWS machine. That's what docker pull command will do. And after that, yes, I will create a container. So after downloading this image, once the docker pull command is finished, then the image is downloaded. Let's take a look. Yes, it is completed downloading. There's a command called docker images you can run. It would show you all the images that you currently have in the host machine. So you have one image in your host machine that you downloaded from hub.docker.com. So it is time to create a container from this image. The command is docker run space name of the image from which you want to create the container. And optionally you can give some name to the container. I'm not doing that. I'm just simply executing this command. Docker run is the command to create a new container. What docker run command does is it will take this image, and from that image it would create a new container. So let us do that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm just creating this container, the WordPress container. That's what I'm doing from this image. So execute this command. So that's it. You see some log, looks like it is starting Apache. Apache seems to have started, right? All these things happened. WordPress is copied in var www HTML or whatever. So it didn't take more than a couple of seconds, right? The container is now up and running inside your AWS machine, and anyone who connect to the container on port 80, they will see a WordPress page. It is as simple as that. Yes, database you haven't taken care. That is a problem that you should fix. We will talk about it later. But running WordPress is as simple as that. So now this container is created inside your AWS machine. This container listen on port 80, and anyone who connect on port 80 of this container, they can see the WordPress page. And how one can connect to that, we will talk about that, don't worry. So this is how you create a container, and once you created the container, you can execute the command docker run. There's a command you can execute called docker run. 1 second, I'll just so there's a command you can execute called docker run. I need to log into the machine one more time. Because my command line got struck, that's why I am going to log in once again. I mean, not struck because of my internet connection, struck because in the first command line here I executed this, so now it is waiting. It started the container, and it is not giving me back the command line, so I decided to log into my AWS machine once again. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to execute docker images. We already discussed about this command. This will show you the list of images. Docker ps is the command that would show you the list of containers. Yes, now we have one container running. And then we have seen the docker pull command. What docker pull command will do, it will download the image. Docker run command would create a container, right? These are the different commands you have seen. So now let's say the container is running and WordPress is running inside the container. That is the current situation. So now for some reason I don't want the container to run anymore. I want to stop the container. There's a command called docker stop. Using the docker stop command, you can stop a container. Now the container got stopped completely. You run the docker ps command, the container is not running anymore. So what will happen to the stopped container? Actually, you can docker ps command with -a option would actually show you the stopped containers as well. Docker ps command will show you only the running containers. Currently, there are no containers running. The only container that was running, we stopped it. So now there are no containers running. If you want to see the stopped containers, this is the command you can use. So like that, these are some, some basic commands you can use when managing Docker. Okay, great. So any question on this? Anyone?
Basil, yesterday that you told us that AWS does not allow port 80 to be listened by default. So now when we are installing this running this container, so does this container image takes care of that?
Actually, the container port and AWS port are different. Every container have their own port that they listen on. So they are different. Only for the AWS machines port 80, we need to worry about opening it in AWS. And then here comes another question. Can you connect to the container on port 80 from outside world? No, not yet. I will talk about that in a bit, right? So if somebody want to browse from outside, yes, port must be open. For the time being, the container that is created in port 80. It is not directly related to AWS, but if anybody from outside want to connect to port 80 of AWS port, it should be open. I will talk about that in a bit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so now you have seen how to download a Docker image, how to see the list of Docker image, how to create a container, how to see the list of containers, how to stop a container, right? These are the things you have seen. And if you want to delete a container permanently, Docker ps -a will show you all the stopped containers. You can delete a stopped container permanently. The command is docker rm. Now the container is deleted permanently. Docker ps -a command won't show. If you want to create a container, it is as quickly as, it is a matter of 2 seconds again, right? And now you created a new container. Of course, it's as simple as that. All right. Okay, now I stopped everything. Currently, I don't have any containers running. So let me talk about some networking side of this. There's a little bit of networking side of this. I will talk about that. So you have a Docker host.
Basil, we haven't seen the output that WordPress page is opening.
We will come to that.
Okay, Basil.
Okay, now let us talk about how exactly the network works within the Docker. So you have a Docker host machine. This is your Docker host machine. And now, right, in this machine, I'm creating a container. So you created a WordPress container in it. Probably later you would create a MySQL container in it. You may create many containers in it, right? That's what you will really do going forward. That's what we will keep doing. Run lots of containers, right? And work with them, right? And every container get a private IP address. I told you about private IP, right? The IP address within your home is an example of a private IP. We discussed that during the prerequisites session. So when you install Docker on your Docker host, Docker provide some networking services as well. It provides the networking services. It provide an IP address to your Docker host. It also provide IP address to each and every containers, and they all can communicate each other within the Docker host. There is no problem. They can communicate to the Docker host because Docker host will also get an IP, and it can also communicate to each and every container, each other. They can communicate each other if you know the IP address of other containers. They all get a private IP and they can communicate each other. The Docker host also has an IP. Docker host can connect to any one of these containers on their IP. So automatically a network get established inside your machine once you install Docker. As soon as you create a new container, automatically it would get a new IP. So your WordPress container that I just created has an IP. The MySQL container that I am going to create will have an IP, and that's how it looks like. So I'm going to create a container. One second.
Basil,
Yep.
On a one machine, how many containers we can create, like n number of containers, or like we have minimum?
N number of containers.
Okay.
Right? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a container by running this command docker run Wordpress. And with this option -d, actually, if you used -d, you will get back your command line. Container will run in the background. Previously, it was displaying me the logs and I got stuck on the command line, right? If you used -d option, it will insist that the container will run in the background. You run the docker ps command, you can see the container is running, but at the same time, you will get back the Linux command line. So -d option is useful. So if you want to know the IP address of this container, the command is, there's a command called docker inspect space container ID. Then it would actually show you the IP address of the container. In case of the WordPress container that we just created, the IP address is 172.17.0.2. To find out this IP address, first you will run docker ps command, get the container ID, then you run the docker inspect command on that container ID, then you will get the IP address of the container. Got it? So this is how you can get to know the IP address of each and every containers that are running on your system. Docker inspect command will help you do that. Okay. All right, the next thing, we have a problem here, right? So assume this is your WordPress container that I just created, and yes, it has an IP address. Let me delete all other containers. Yes, one host can run multiple containers, and right now it's only one container that we have created, our WordPress container. And you know that as soon as the WordPress container got created, it would be running Apache on port 80. That is how WordPress work, right? So anyone who connect on port 80, they can see the WordPress page. And the container has just the private IP. Who has the public IP? Your AWS machine has the public IP. So can I ask you this question? You from your laptop, somebody sitting in Bangalore, right? And assume this machine, AWS machine, is in New York, and the container is created inside that AWS machine. So I am sitting in Bangalore. My browser can connect to the AWS machine. Can I? Is it possible? Can I connect directly to the AWS machine from my browser? Of course, I need to open port
Yes.
in 18 AWS, of course, but I can connect, right? There's a connection between my laptop and the AWS machine. The AWS machine get a public IP. So yes, from my laptop, I can connect to my Docker host, but I cannot connect to my Docker container. Am I right? Can I connect to the Docker container? Is it possible? No, I cannot
No.
connect to the Docker container because the Docker container don't have a public IP. It just has a private IP. All right, so if I want to make this container visible to the people outside the AWS machine, I should set up some kind of port forwarding. I will mention that people can connect on my AWS machine on a specific port, for example, port 80. Anyone who connect on port 80 of my AWS machine, forward them to the port 80 of the container. You can configure such kind of port forwarding within your AWS machine. And if you did that, then people from outside world would be able to connect to the container. Can you mute? Somebody is unmute. Once I finish this, I will take your question. When you are not speaking, keep yourself on mute. Okay. So anyone in the world can connect to the AWS machine. So you will configure some port forwarding in the AWS machine such that any request coming on 80 will be sent to the container. So you can do this. You can do this kind of port forwarding, and you can do it at the time of Docker container creation. Docker does that for you. So that is exactly what I am going to do. When I create this container, I also specify some kind of port forwarding within the Docker run command, and Docker will set up that port forwarding for me. And that is exactly what I am going to do. I go to my AWS machine. Come on. I got disconnected. Let me connect again.
Basil,
Yeah.
so as you said, if like our AWS machine has a public IP, so from my laptop I can access that AWS machine. But that container is a part of AWS, correct? Like inside that AWS machine. So once I'm able to log into that AWS machine, automatically that container part will also be accessible for me, or I need to do what you are saying, that
This is
port forwarding
whatever
and
I
all.
am talking about is the networking setup. This is the way how Docker networking is configured, and this is the only way you can connect to the container, by setting up some port forwarding. And yeah, you are right about the fact that it is container is running in the AWS machine. All that facts are correct, but the point here is that this is the way how Docker networking works. You should do the port forwarding if you want to connect to the container directly from the outside world. From the AWS machine, you can connect internally, no problem. From outside, there must be some port forwarding that you pre-configured, then only it will work.
Okay.
And Soumya, make sure that you are on mute when you are not talking. So otherwise some noise would come from the background. That's why. So everyone, when you are not speaking, put yourself on mute. Okay. So any other questions? Anyone? All right. So now let us expose our Wordpress container to the outside world. That's what I'm going to do. Let me log into my AWS machine. Docker ps command would show you the list of containers. I currently have a container running. Let me stop this container. I will create a new container. So I'm going to create a new container. Docker run WordPress is the command to create a new container. I use -d option, so it will run in the background. I'm using one more option, -p 80:80. So what this means is I want port 80 of my Docker host to be forwarded to the port 80 of the container. To clarify, what I am doing here is that I am creating this container. At the same time, I want the port 80 on the host machine to be forwarded to port 80 of the container. What that means is, from now, anyone in the world connect to port 80 of my AWS machine from any browser in the world, automatically their connection will go to this container and they will see the WordPress page. They will directly connect to the container. That's what it means. All right, so let us do that. I'm executing this command. Sorry, I'm executing this command. Now what happened is the container got created, and also it is exposed to the port 80 of your AWS machine. First one is the host port, second one is the container port. So anyone who connect on your Docker host or the AWS machine on port 80, they will get connected to the container on port 80. Which container? This container that you just created on port 80, and Apache is running inside that container. It will give you the web page, the WordPress page. So let us try to browse it. And remember, in AWS, there's a security group. You must open port 80. Anyone in the world want to connect to AWS machine on port 80 of your AWS, port 80 must be open. So let me do that. Let me open port 80. Yeah, I opened the port 80 because from the browser, people directly connect to the IP address of the AWS machine. So port 80 must be open, and anyone in the world can now browse for my AWS machine's public IP. They will automatically get connected to the container which is running inside my AWS machine. And yes, I expected this. I am getting an error. I have not provided any database credentials to my container. That's why this error is coming. So once I provided the database credentials, this error would go. So let me do that. All right. So any questions so far? Are we good? All right. So what I will do is, so I will tell you what happened so far. Right. You created the WordPress container, but you have not created a database and you have not told WordPress how to connect to database. So I want to do that. I want to create a database container. You know where MySQL listen on? MySQL listen on the port 3306. Apache listen on 80. MySQL by default it listen on 3306. Maybe changed. And I must have a database here. I must have a user and password here. And then I would provide all these credentials to WordPress. How would I provide that? I would edit this file wp-config.php. So this step is pending. We haven't done that yet. Database creation and connecting WordPress to database is something that we must do. So first of all, let me create a database container. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to create a MySQL container. And yes, I have a MySQL official Docker image from which I can create it. Just like, WordPress has a official image, MySQL also has a official image. I can get it from hub.docker.com. So I go to hub.docker.com, search for MySQL image. I will find one and I will use that to create MySQL container. So let's do that. I will go to hub.docker.com, search for MySQL. Search for MySQL and you find an official MySQL image. This is the name of the image is MySQL, and I'm going to execute the command docker pull MySQL. And if you want a specific version of MySQL, you can choose which tag you want to pull, right? So by default, it would be latest. Let's say if you want MySQL 5.7, you can mention MySQL 5.7 along with the docker pull command, right? So I'm going to execute the docker pull command on my Docker host. The command is docker pull MySQL, and if you want the latest MySQL, just run that command. Or if you want MySQL 5.7, you mention MySQL colon 5.7. Then what happens is that particular version of MySQL image will be downloaded. Sometimes you will have requirement, you don't want the latest, you want this one, so you can choose that. This is how you choose it. You specify the tag. Every image has a tag. So now you run the command docker images. You can see now you have the MySQL image, MySQL 5.7 and WordPress latest. Perfect. So let us create a MySQL container. What is the command to create a MySQL container? You already know. Docker run. You would also use -d option, and the image, what is the image that you want to use? It's MySQL 5.7. This is the image that I want to use to create a container. Do I want any port forwarding? I'm not doing any port forwarding. Database don't need any port forwarding. So I don't just want to create the MySQL container. I also want to create a database in it, a database user in it, a database password in it, because Wordpress need that. So along with the container creation, I also want to create a database, a user, and a password. At the same time, I don't want to run these SQL queries, create database, create user, create password, grant privileges. I don't want to do that. Without doing that, I want a database user and password to be created automatically. So image provide such kind of flexibilities. I will show you. Let's take a look at the hub.docker.com page. For the MySQL image, you will find something called environmental variables. If you click on MySQL image and open it, it would take you to this page. Come down, and every image support a number of environmental variable. MySQL root password. This variable is mandatory. Oh, it's mandatory. So you must specify this variable. It specify the root password of MySQL. So every time you install MySQL, there will be a root user, the administrator user. He must have a password. So you should specify the password. MySQL database, if you specified, then automatically the database get created at the time of container creation. Perfect. Then MySQL user and MySQL password, if you pass these two variables, then it means that it would create the user with this password, and also he will get permission to this database as well. So this is what I want. So what the Docker MySQL Docker image documentation tells me is that at the time of creating the MySQL container from this image, if you pass these variables, then the container get configured automatically. What does that mean? A database get created in it, a user get created, password get created, and the user get full permission on the database. Everything will happen at one shot if you pass these four variables. And that's what I'm doing. That is exactly what I am going to do. Along with the Docker run command, I am passing some values to all these variables. So first of all, MySQL root password. So I pass some value. Let's say you use -e option to specify these things. DevOps 1, I want the root password to be. Then what are the other variable? Then there is a MySQL database I need to mention. So I use -e MySQL database equal to WPDB, some name, whatever database I want to be created. And then MySQL user, you use -e option every time you want to specify a variable. It's WP user. And then over here, I mentioned the MySQL password. So I mentioned here MySQL password equal to whatever password I want to create for the user. So this is mandatory, that's why I am using it. This one I am putting because I want a database to be created with this name. I want a user and password to be created with these credentials. That's why I am passing this environmental variable, because the documentation clearly say if I pass these variables, right? If I pass these variables automatically, it would create database user and password for me inside the container. So I'm going to execute this command. Let's take a look what happens. Container got created. Run the docker ps command. You can see the MySQL container is running, right? Container ID here. This is the image from which container is created. If I run docker inspect command, If I run docker inspect command, I can get the IP address of the container. It is 172.170.3. So all looking good. And since I passed those variables, it is guaranteed that, so I will repeat what I did from the MySQL official image, from the MySQL 5.7 image. I created a container. This is the container that I created, and automatically MySQL is running on this container on 3306 port. A database got created, and a user got created, and a password got created. And now I can configure my WordPress container to connect to the database using the IP address, right? Not localhost. This time it has to be IP address. WordPress want to connect to the IP address of the MySQL container, because WordPress is in different container, MySQL is in different container. Communication will be using IP address, not localhost. So my database is ready. Now it is time to configure my WordPress container to connect to it. I want to tell WordPress what is the name of the database to be put inside the wp-config.php, what is the name of the user, what is the password, and what is the IP address of the database container. These 4 information WordPress need to know if it want to connect to database. So let me do that. Again, I don't want to log into this container, and I don't want to use the nano editor to open wp-config.php. That is not my intention. I want to make sure that the wp-config.php file automatically get the database credentials at the time of creating the container. Actually, that is possible too. When you create WordPress container from the official WordPress image, WordPress official image supports some environmental variable, just like how you used for MySQL. You can pass database name, username, password, IP address of the database container. These 4 values you can pass at the time of container creation. Automatically, wp-config.php file would contain those credentials. Yes, you can do this. This image also support environmental variables. So let us take a look. What are the supported environmental variable for this image? I will go to this image hub.docker.com documentation, get the environmental variable and use them at the time of WordPress container creation. So I don't have to manually edit wp-config.php. It is automatically edited by the Docker itself. So let us do that. I go to the Docker documentation, hub.docker.com, search for WordPress here in the search box. This is the official WordPress image. Open it. You find the supported variables. Database host, the IP address of the database container is what you should specify here. The user, password, and database name. You already created a database in the database container, right? Your database container is already up and running. It contains database user password. So same credentials, you will give it to WordPress by these variables. So I'm going to create a new fresh WordPress container. I will delete the old one, right? Let me create a new one, a fresh one. So go here and okay, I got disconnected. 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second. All right, so yeah, Currently, I have a Wordpress container running. I'm going to stop it and I will create a new one. But this time I stopped the container. I'm creating a new one. How do you do that? The docker run command with -d option, -p option to do the port forwarding. And now I specify the name of the image. Then I am going to specify all the environmental variables one by one, which I can get from the hub.docker.com documentation. So yeah, WordPress DB host. What is WordPress DB host? It is nothing but the IP address of the MySQL container. I already ran the docker inspect command and I found the IP address. It was 172.17.0.3. So let me use the same IP address over here. -e option, when you specify variable, you should mention -e option, -e variable equal to value. Then again -e next variable equal to next value. It's the next variable database user, the same credentials which you already created in database. And then what else? The database password. Now I want to mention the database password, which is DevOps 12345. That is exactly what I created. And the name of the database, which is WPDB. So I will repeat once again what I am doing. Okay. What I am doing here is that I'm going to create a container. I'm creating this WordPress container from this WordPress image, and I found something very beautiful in the WordPress documentation. At the time of creating the WordPress container, I can edit wp-config.php file without nano. All I need to do is pass some environmental variable. I want to tell WordPress what is the name of the database, what is the username, what is the password, what is the IP address of the database host. This 4 information I can give it to WordPress at the time of the docker run command, at the time of creating this WordPress container. At the time of docker run command, I can pass all these values and automatically container get created, right? With wp config have the proper settings in it. So one command will do that, right? A single command will do all that. Just execute it. That's it. You created a WordPress container which connects to this database container with the correct database credential. So now if you browse for the public IP of the AWS machine, you can browse the public IP because you did the port forwarding. So let us try to browse for the public IP of your AWS machine now. Yes, the database error is gone, right? The database error is gone and now all looking good. So what is the current setup right now? The current setup right now is, let me clarify this, the architecture once again. So I have 2 containers. One is the WordPress container, other one is the MySQL container, and both are created in my AWS machine. My AWS machine has these containers running in it. And what I also did is I set up some port forwarding so that any request coming on port 80 will go to port 80 of this container. So I did some port forwarding only for the WordPress container, right? That is sufficient. You don't want to expose database to the outside world. Only WordPress will be connecting to database. So you don't want database container to be exposed to the outside world. So that is why only for WordPress I did the port forwarding. port 80 on the host will be forwarded to port 80 of the container. So from anyone in the world, from their browser, they connect on port 80 of the AWS machine, automatically the request would be sent to the container. The container will, the Apache running in the container will respond to him with a web page. And whenever WordPress want to connect to database, it is actually able to connect to database, and database reside in a separate container. WordPress using the IP address of the container, it is connecting to database. So this is what we had done right now. So there are few things that I did not explain to you that we will talk about in the next class. Tomorrow you don't have class, it would be day after tomorrow. So yeah, there are few things. How exactly this wp-config.php file get modified? Just by passing environmental variable, you are modifying this file. How that happens, or how inside this database container, how this database got created automatically. All you did is you specified the environmental variable, automatically database got created. So what is happening underneath, right? That is something we will talk about in the next session. And we will also learn to develop our own Docker images, our own WordPress image. We will try to develop ourselves. Right now we have been using the Docker images from hub.docker.com, the free Docker images, right? The WordPress image and MySQL image. There are many images in hub.docker.com. We have been using them, right? So now we will learn how to develop them from the scratch, right? So that is also something we will discuss in the next class. All right, so any questions?
Basil, can you copy paste and chart the command for MySQL and this WordPress?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what I just sent you is for WordPress. And this one is for MySQL. So I have sent you both the commands. And yeah, the sessions probably, it's bit new, not difficult, but very interesting topics actually. So you just watch the video once again, crack it down, spend today and tomorrow you spend your time on and making sure that you are very clear with all these concepts of Docker. It's very, very important. All right, that's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, any questions? So there's a question from Soumya. What about the command lines to install Docker? Yeah, Soumya, it's better to yeah, I can share them all. It's not a big deal. Always better to do it from your side. You want to install Docker, you search in Google Docker install Ubuntu and do it. And I'm sending the link in the chat if you need to refer. So always whatever you need, I mean, one thing that you always need to understand is whatever you need when it comes to Linux or Docker or this open source software, you get everything from Google. And 50% you should be learning what I teach you, and remaining 50% you will learn from the Google. And when you start working, right, whatever you learned during the class, what we teach would be, even Google search would become more relevant to you to find out the answer. So it's very important. And still, I get a 50% of the answer from Google rather than finding everything myself while I am working. So that is one thing you must improve. Keep exploring. One is to improve the command line performance. becoming faster with the command line. The second thing is keep searching in Google, find the answers what you need, and that should also become fast, right? Initially, the people who are used to searching in Google for finding the solution, they are, you know, at least 10 times faster than the people who are not that much used to Google. I mean, you are Google using Google for different purpose. I'm talking about the job, from the job perspective or from the technical perspective. How fast you can find an answer from Google is very, very important, and that is another part you should improve. You should keep working on. Uh, for me, initially I want to install Apache. First, I search in Google how to install Apache in Ubuntu. Then I read one or two tutorials. Then I learn, okay, this is how I install Apache. I run apt-get install, apt-get update, then apt-get install. Then I come back and I run them. Probably it would take me, more than half an hour to do that, even though it was a matter of single commands. Now the only thing what I search in Google is I search in Google Apache Ubuntu package, and I know that in 90% of the cases, the first Google search result itself would give me the exact package name. Then I run the command apt-get install, then package name. It works. How much time do you take for installing a software, for searching in Google to find the package name? You don't take more than 10 or 15 seconds, right? But right now that is not the case. Right now you search in Google, and one important part of the learning is to learn how to search in Google, and it is huge than what I'm telling you now, right? That must be a habit of each one of you. Keep exploring, keep learning Google search, keep learning how to search in Google with respect to your job, and believe me, that would help a lot, especially in a DevOps profile. That will help a lot. Okay, it's very, very important.
Basil, like
Yeah,
where we can find the material in portal, like to take an hard copy.
I don't think it is in printable format.
Okay,
Yeah, you have to stick to the portal
okay, okay,
or copy paste it somewhere. I mean, if you
okay,
want to.
okay. Mm. Is there material in the portal?
Not downloadable ones, it would be more mostly readable ones.
Mm.
So yeah, there would be PPTs and stuff. Some materials are there, but
Okay,
mostly the articles are just readable form, not in a printable or downloadable form. No, you can
okay.
copy paste. Okay.
So Basil, we mentioned a DB host IP on WordPress. So is that our private IP of AWS machine?
No, when we set up Docker, automatically Docker created private IP for every containers. Remember that IP.
Okay, okay, thank you.
So every time you install Docker, Docker would create a network, a private network itself, and every container get a private IP. Also, the Docker host get a private IP. So this is a different range of private IP, and those are the IP address we will use for container to container communication. Wordpress want to connect to MySQL container, or shopping cart want to connect to MySQL container. Container to container communication, we use that IP provided by Docker. Docker provide a separate IP to every container, private IP. Why MySQL was not downloaded along with a WordPress image? Yeah, I might have told you yesterday. The WordPress image does not contain MySQL. Okay, WordPress image does not contain MySQL. MySQL is a separate entity, and in real time also in a production environment also. Database is created separately, applications are created separately, and they will communicate each other using IP address. Even though in our case we use localhost, right? I told you generally database is run on a separate instance, application run on a separate instance. So since we are using containerization, we use containers, one container to run MySQL and one container to run WordPress. And going forward, we will be using only containers. Mostly we will be using containers for everything.
Basil,
Yes.
so post installing this Apache in our existing AWS, what if you are using, we need to delete that AWS machine, and for this particularly for this Docker part, we need to create a new one, correct?
It's better, yeah. Terminate the old machine, right click and terminate it, then create a new one, and better to install Docker on a fresh machine. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, any questions? All right, and you need to watch today's video one more time. Even if you understood it completely, still watch it one more time. Believe me, something will lighten up. And Samira, you just give them a call, and let us see how fast we can do it. From my
Yes,
side, I'm
sure.
just, the only thing what I can do is I can just keep reminding them, nothing else. So call
Yeah,
them.
I'll talk to them. Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks everyone. And somebody access, I said I will check, right? Anyone who facing any issues related to access? Minali, for you it's working, right?
Yes, Basil.
Both portal and yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And you have my mail ID, so send me an email if anybody is facing any kind of problem. Just drop me an email. You must have, this is my email ID. I just send it in the chat. You must have access for both videos and portal. Okay. Yeah. See you day after tomorrow. Tomorrow you don't have class. Day after tomorrow. Bye. Have a great weekend.
Bye, Basil. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.